Let's be honest, the biggest news of this week didn't come from Ukraine. The world's eyes are fixed on the burgeoning conflict between Israel, the United States, and Iran. After the initial attack on Iran on February 28th, Tehran responded by launching attacks across the region, and together with ballistic missiles, its key weapon is a Shahed type of drone. Social media is now flooded with videos of aerial attacks on cities like Tel Aviv and Beirut, with weapons exploding into buildings or colliding in midair. And for many viewers, these scenes are deeply unsettling. But for Ukrainians, this is an all too familiar sight. For years, Russia has been launching waves of kamikaze drones, engineered by Iran and innovated by Russia, to attack areas with large civilian populations. These scenes play out across Ukraine on nearly a daily basis. And for years, Ukraine has been warning, the world is not prepared for the day that Russia, or one of its allies, turns their almost bottomless shared supply of high-tech attack drones on the Baltics, Taiwan, or South Korea, although those certainly aren't the only countries that need to be worried. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and this week we're going to talk about how Russia and its allies have innovated the suicide drone far faster than the West has been able to build sufficient defenses against it, and what that all means for the future of wars around the world. Now, let's start at the beginning. Exactly what kind of drone are we talking about here? Now, the original drone developed in this style was the Iranian Shahed, whose name translates literally to mean witness, but which can also be interpreted as martyr. We are not talking about the small, remote-controlled FPV drones that dominate the front lines. Instead, this type of drone is larger than a person, about the size and weight of a motorcycle or a golf cart. Over time, they've been developed to fly thousands of kilometers from their launch points in Russia or Russian-occupied territory. They were initially designed to follow a preset path and fly directly into stationary targets with payloads equal to hundreds of sticks of dynamite. A single one of these drones can destroy several apartments or a freestanding home. The logic behind using this kind of weaponry is simple. The cost of producing a single attack drone is in the tens of thousands of dollars, and they can cause millions of dollars in damage with just a single hit. A whole building or piece of energy infrastructure can be taken out by just one drone. Shahed-type drones make a noise that some people describe like a chainsaw, a lawnmower, or most commonly, a motorcycle. And actually, when you live under regular fire from Shaheds, which most Ukrainians do, you start getting irrationally angry at the people who rev their motorcycles down long strips of road because the sound is pretty similar to a drone hurtling by. Russia began launching Shaheds at Ukraine in the fall of 2022, after Iran supplied hundreds of them. And they quickly developed the tactic that's only escalated since, of launching waves of drone one after another, usually in the middle of the night, to overwhelm air defense and terrorize civilians. At first, those waves of drones were small and infrequent, although they did not feel that way at the time. A couple years ago, it was a big, frightening event when even a handful of drones was spotted over Kyiv at once, and it was rare for drones to reach the west of Ukraine. But over time, the attacks grew in size and frequency, until during some nights in 2025, Russia launched 6, 7, and then more than 800 drones at all corners of Ukraine in a single night, multiple times a week, week after week. What was once a freak occurrence here in Kyiv is now a constant presence, and what used to be considered a severe air raid is now barely noticeable. And yes, that means that the bad ones are more severe and more deadly than we could have imagined a few years ago. All that is to say, Russia took Iran's idea and ran with it, straight into the homes of sleeping Ukrainian families. In the last few years, Russia has created its own improved version of the Shahed, the Garen, which is short for geranium, the logical next step up from martyr, which it now produces commercially at scale within its own borders. Russia began building its own factories almost immediately after receiving the first drones from Iran, using cheap labor from migrants, teenagers, and other economically vulnerable populations. Ukrainian officials say that Russian versions of the drone have improved navigation systems, bigger payloads, and sometimes use jet engines. In other words, they've increased the speed, the range, and the maneuverability, making them a much more effective and deadlier weapon than its baseline model. Investigations by various parties, including our own, have repeatedly found that Russia is building the drones with foreign electrical components that sanctions should technically prevent them from obtaining, including from the US and Europe. Russia is currently on the 5th model of the Garand, with the latest version appearing in January of this year. In the time it's taken them to develop 5 models, Ukraine has also been hard at work finding new ways to destroy, override, and jam new versions of drones. But it hasn't been a smooth ride. The display of air defense in the Middle East this week has been underwhelming, with allies like the UK seeking Ukraine's guidance on how best to defend against the waves of drones, guidance that President Volodymyr Zelensky framed as irreplaceable. But before we go into Ukraine's anti-drone tactics, much like we had to define exactly what kind of drone we're talking about, we also need to establish a common understanding of the other side of the coin. What is air defense? It's a blanket term for all of the weaponry a given country has for shooting down weapons that are launched at it. Air defense is not a single weapon, but rather a comprehensive system of spotting, alerting, and destroying threats from the sky, while trying to inflict the least amount of damage to people and objects on the ground. In some cases, this means billion-dollar Lockheed Martin missile systems, and sometimes it means a Ukrainian soldier with a machine gun. There are high-stakes calculations to be made even under the best of conditions. A drone that's been intercepted can still crash down and kill people, or destroy a building, and so can an interceptor missile that's missed its target. Even with all the money and power in the world, there isn't a single, foolproof way to defend a patch of sky, and defensive weapons fall on a spectrum from affordable to accurate. Having strong air defense isn't just about having the flashiest safeguard. It's about having a safeguard that you can operate reliably over time, and that the enemy hasn't found a way to fool, which is a much harder objective than simply obtaining a state-of-the-art defensive weapon. Western-made air defense systems like Patriots, NASAMS, and IRIS-T are highly effective against Iranian drones, but these fall decidedly into the expensive category. Some cost 20 times more than a single drone and can't be used every time. For years, Ukraine's main solution was mobile air defense units, who drive pickup trucks with mounted machine guns and literally hunt down drones. Now, this method is obviously cheaper and easier to roll out, but has success results far, far below more advanced weaponry. So, Ukraine had to innovate. And here to talk about this innovation is Colin Post, the Kyiv Independent's defense industry reporter. So Colin, can you walk us through the evolution of Ukraine's air defense against Shahed-type drones and what's driven it?
Initially, the best strategy was these sort of mobile air defense groups. So people armed with a lot of Browning machine guns loaded in the back of trucks. There were people positioned out near the front with, U.S.-made Stinger missiles or Soviet Eagle or Needles. And as Russia began making more of their own, they began sending them in bigger and bigger waves. And they also started modifying the original sort of purchase order, the version they got from the Iranian state's aviation manufacturing to suit their own needs, which meant avoiding Ukrainian air defense. As a result, these two things have sort of developed hand in hand. Ukrainian air defense became more adept at hunting these things down, maybe most notably recently with interceptor drones of their own. So the interceptor drones can follow Shaheds where they are more mobile. Interceptor drones, as opposed to the Browning machine guns, the truck-mounted machine guns, those can only reach so far, and they have a limited scope, particularly the horizon. An interceptor drone can, in theory, get further away and also follow a Shahed as it's going lower down to hug the Earth's surface. The flip side is Russia added better automation, better self-guidance, and maybe most notably recently, the Shaheds were armed with Starlink terminals that were keeping them in contact. We're still not totally, The consequences of shutting off Russian Starlink access for the most part within the territory of Ukraine, we're still sort of processing how much that's changing Ukrainian air defense, but it does seem to have reduced the effectiveness of the Shaheds in the country.
So, what is the scale of interceptor drones being used currently, and how effective are they?
Currently, they are contingent upon Western co-production deals. So there are interceptor drones being produced locally by local manufacturers, but they are, as with much of Ukraine's better weaponry, dependent upon these kind of clunky supply chains into Ukraine, right? The border is a very opaque territory, and for better motors, for example, or more advanced vision, better navigation modules, a lot of these are dependent upon parts from abroad, as much as Ukraine has tried to onshore these things. To answer your question, there are a fair number of interceptors being produced today, but they're not of the level that they need to be or that Ukraine hopes them to be. There's also the issue, right? Shaheds are very long range, and they use part of that range to trace these sort of intricate paths into Ukraine by ways that avoid air defense units. Russia is pretty good at keeping track of these, unfortunately. The way that interceptor drones currently work depend on a lot of people directly involved in the chain, and they do have a limited range, partially due to their battery life, and also due to connectivity issues. So for scaling up interceptor drones, it's not just about having enough functioning interceptor drones. It is also about having enough teams located in places that you have a full grid of interception, right? And that also requires a lot of training of those teams. And this has been a consistent issue. And this is also why people are extremely interested in automating the actual guidance on all kinds of drones, but especially interceptor drones.
It was announced on Thursday that the US and at least one Gulf state, either Qatar or the United Arab Emirates, are in talks to buy Ukrainian interceptor drones. Officials cite the low cost and ease of mass production that Ukraine has developed as reasons that it should be the first point of purchase for countries seeking the most time and cost-effective solution to their current problem. A problem that for many of them wasn't taken seriously until very recently. These drones I'm talking about are responsible for the tired looks you see on our staff's faces. We report day and night, regardless of how many of them Russia sends. But we can't do it without you. The Kyiv Independent is funded by our readers and viewers, meaning that none of this would be possible without the community of supporters who get us through. If you'd like to join and help support independent journalism in Ukraine, while also getting some cool perks to let you engage more closely with our work, there will be a link to our membership page in the description below. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. Every time a new conflict breaks out, so do the World War III memes on social media. Ukrainians tend not to share them as much, because, as this Ukrainian tweet I saw the other day so eloquently put it, I'm wondering, during World War II, did it also take a long time for them to figure out that they were in a world war? Westerners look at their phones and see these Iranian drones smashing into buildings, and wonder if that could be an indicator of a big war to come. Ukrainians see the same images and then look outside at Russian drones smashing into buildings for the 5th year, building on earlier tactics that Russia used to strike Syria before that, and the answer is clear. The world has been in a big war for quite a while now. Russia, China, North Korea, and their allies are placing their bets in large-scale drone manufacturing and sharing information and resources among each other. Iranian drones recovered in the last week have unsurprisingly been found to contain Russian parts. These countries' next moves are not a mystery. They're not building these drones to sit in storage. It's a matter of when and where they start launching them, not if. Countries that share a border with one of these hostile superpowers, like the Baltics, are already preparing for waves of drones in the coming years. These are the countries where residents see footage of Shaheds hitting Ukrainian cities and know that the same could happen to their homes in a matter of hours if Russia were to pivot towards them. And I'd like to point out that actually, that's true of most of Europe. But those on the eastern flank of NATO are far more awake to it than those with a physical buffer. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania may have begun planning for expanding and diversifying their air defense, but even with the heightened alertness of a few, Europe and NATO would still be painfully caught off guard by a Russian drone attack. Already, drones launched by Russia have landed in NATO countries bordering Ukraine, and NATO's reaction, both in the moment and afterwards, has been uncoordinated. There's no consensus among countries about when and how to engage Russian drones and other weaponry, and on multiple occasions, drones have traveled well into Polish territory before crashing down or being shot. The fact that Poland has US-supplied Patriots doesn't ensure total protection. Whether a deliberate provocation or a test of NATO detection systems, Russia has proved that it can send multiple attack drones into multiple countries on multiple occasions and suffer no consequences from NATO, which is essentially a dress rehearsal for planned drone warfare beyond Ukraine's borders. Ukraine's experience provides one of the few real-world case studies of what such warfare looks like over time, and how many levels go into defending against it. Diverse weaponry, rapid adaptation, and awareness that the enemy is looking to exploit any loophole it can find. Here to talk about what the world needs to do to prepare is retired Australian general and strategist Mick Ryan. So to kind of jump right into that, the style of drones being used by Iran right now isn't exactly new. Why is the world so shocked by these scenes that they're seeing?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I think many people in the world have kind of turned off the Ukraine conflict in the last couple of years. They've moved on. People in the West are very impatient, and therefore they haven't really followed the really significant acceleration of Russian attacks on Ukraine with the Shahed drones and the large numbers of these drones that are used in these attacks. I think the second reason is that even for those who have followed the war in Ukraine, they've often thought that, this is only going to happen in Ukraine. They haven't been able to intellectually get across the fact that this could happen to them too, particularly for countries who live close to Iran. So I think there's a mixture of people not following the war, and also there's been a failure of humility in many Western military organisations, and they haven't learned the lessons from Ukraine, even though they've been very available for people to learn, and even though the Ukrainian government has been very keen to share its insights from the war.
But so speaking to that failure, what are the biggest mistakes that NATO has made when it comes to preparing for this kind of drone warfare? How prepared is NATO really, and how far does it have to go?
Well, I think when we talk about NATO, we kind of have to break it up into the Eastern European countries, which have proximity to not just Ukraine, but also to the threat of Russia, so Poland, the Baltics, Scandinavian countries. I think they've learnt more quickly and made structural changes more quickly and invested in things for Ukraine to help combat this threat. I think the further you go west to places like Spain, there has been less kind of investment in absorbing the lessons. And then the further away you get to places like Australia and elsewhere, there really has been a dearth of learning. And there's a lack of humility, a lack of sense of urgency. People think, oh, well, we're a long way away. This couldn't happen to us. And I think, there's still very much a peacetime mindset. We've had 4 years to get out of that, and a lot of politicians have refused to get out of that peacetime mindset. I think that's going to hurt us. It's hurting the Middle East now, and it will probably hurt us in the Pacific in the future.
Peacetime, yes, but there have been these kind of provocations of drones going into Poland, Romania, the Baltics. What has that shown about how prepared NATO is to respond?
They have response mechanisms. There's no doubt that they have the radars and sensors to detect these things. They send up fighter aircraft and stuff, but there's still very much first generation interception of these things with expensive fighters or expensive missiles. Ukraine moved into second, third. It's gone through this adaptation spiral over 4 years of detecting and intercepting drones at scale. And it's now, I think what Ukraine has done is kind of achieved somewhat of a holy grail. It is now able to detect and intercept Shahed drones at an order of magnitude cheaper than what Shahed drones cost. At the start of the war, we'd shoot down a $50,000 drone with a $500,000 missile. Ukraine is now shooting down a $50,000 Russian drone with a $3,000 to $5,000 interceptor. That significantly changes the economics of war. It significantly changes the affordability of protracted conflicts. But the thing is, these interceptors aren't new. They've been around for a year or 18 months, and still they haven't found their way into the inventories of Western military organisations.
On that sort of timeline, the million-dollar question, what will the future of these drones look like, and what will kind of the future of air defense look like as they evolve, which they're doing at rapid speed?
Certainly Ukraine went into this war where, the leading edge was drone and drone warfare, and therefore drones had a very big advantage. Counter-drone operations lagged a long way behind until recently. But, Ukraine and Russia, because of their interactions, have come a long way with counter-drone warfare. And in the kind of drones the Shaheds are being used, it's cheaper to intercept them than to use those kind of drones. That is a very significant development. We're not there yet with small tactical drones. Obviously, intercepting and destroying $500 drones is a different undertaking. But still, I think the gap between drone and counter-drone capability is much closer. And I think once we close it even further, you start seeing the capacity for more effective offensive operations, not being stuck in defensive operations, or being able to cross tactical and operational distances in a way that's survivable. We're not quite there yet, but we could get there if Ukrainian developments, supported by its coalition partners, in counter-drone operations continue at the speed that they're going at the moment.
And what would kind of the first steps of that cooperation look like? I mean, maybe for Europe as an example.
Well, it's certainly been going on with European countries and the United States. I know Eric Schmidt has been a big supporter of these kind of things from the United States of America, but Germany, Britain and others have invested in the technology to intercept drones, whether it's sensors, whether it's the interceptors, whether it's the command and control systems that knit them together. And they've invested by putting money into the Ukrainian defence industrial complex, which has more capacity than the Ukrainian government has money to put into it. It's certainly something I've lobbied my government to do, is just give Ukrainian defence industry money to buy stuff from its industry. It's a more effective way of supporting Ukraine. If we've learned anything in the last 4 days in the Middle East, is that we haven't learnt enough, and we haven't learnt fast enough from Ukraine when it comes to countering drone operations, and we need to speed up and be better.
Drone attacks are not a distant sci-fi hypothetical. They're a reality and have been for a long time. To someone who has never heard an attack drone buzzing overhead, it seems unimaginable. But so many people who feel that way right now are going to gain firsthand experience of it in the coming years. And if that makes you uncomfortable, it should. Ukraine has been warning for years about the growing threat, and it has largely been dismissed. It's both satisfying and infuriating to have foreign nations turning to Ukraine now for answers and advice, while everything is in chaos. There's no harder time to work out a defense plan than when one is actively under attack. There is no way to erase the growing stockpiles of drones sitting in Russia, Iran, and China. But that absolutely does not mean that the situation is hopeless. These weapons will shape warfare in the coming years, but the volume produced, and their effectiveness, can be countered. If NATO and the West is serious about defense, the priority should be cutting off the hostile war machines at the source, not through inconsistent sanctions and condemnations, but through real economic and military pressure that breaks down the chain of production and systems that uphold it. Beyond that, countries need to build and implement their own layered defense and coordinate with their allies so that they can act decisively in the event of a Russian drone attack on a member state. If the West can acknowledge the danger and act from a place of realism when it comes to drones, it may still have time to build robust defenses against them. If not, the scenes we're seeing play out in Ukraine and the Middle East will only be the beginning.
community question of the week comes from Star Player One. They were asking about the government's plan to allow businesses in critical areas to have their own air defense units. This was the expansion of a program in November in which state-owned companies in critical areas like energy and transport were allowed to employ their own air defense units. But critically, this was overseen by the Ukrainian armed forces. Now that program has expanded to allow private businesses to have their own air defense units. And how it works is the business must be seen as critical. So especially in the energy sector, which got absolutely ravaged by Russian drones and missiles over the winter and continues to do so. So their employees will go through specific training with the armed forces to shoot down drones and missiles. And the business themselves will cover the cost of that. The equipment and the weapons, those are not being used by the army. So it's not as if we're going to have, crucial equipment being sent from Donbass to Kyiv to protect a power plant. No, this is equipment that's not being used currently. And all the training will be done by the armed forces. So it's a really interesting development. Ukrainian businesses have been suffering a lot from Russian attacks. So this gives them a chance to defend themselves better and with proper training. So we'll see what the effects of that will be in the coming months.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you appreciated this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.